Om Mangalam Gurudevaya Devyam Atriksha Mangalam Mangalam Bhakta Brindevyo Sarva Lokaya Mangalam Om Stapakaya Chadharmasya Sarva Dharma Sarupine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishna Yati Namaha Om Jananim Sharadam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagat Gurum Parapadme Tiyostritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu Sarashiva Samarambam Shankarachara Majmam Ashmarachara Prayantam Vande Gurum Paramparam Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Deva Maheshwara Guru Deva Param Brahman Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Om Bhadrakali Namo Nityam Saraswati Namo Namaha Veda Vedanga Vedanta Vidyasthana Evacha Sri Ganesha Sharada Guru Bhyo Namah Hari Om Jai Ma Jai Ma. Happy to see everyone. We're continuing our discussions on the Devi Gita from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. And last week, I guess, one meeting, two meetings, I think we finally, after many months, many meetings, we got to verse 28, 29, where the Divine Mother appears to the gods after their many hundreds of years, thousands of years of intense spiritual practice in order to have her vision so that they can and thus get a boon from her. If you remember the big the larger story where this text appears, that a great demon has been, after Sati has left her body, the world has become very inauspicious. A demon has taken over the worlds with a boon that no one can kill him except the legitimate son of Shiva. Shiva has no wife, therefore no child. He takes over the three worlds. The gods go into the Himalayas, do tremendous austerities in order to get a boon. And so now she has appeared. So the opening verses of her appearance describe her as the Paramaha, the great transcendental light. And so we talked a lot about different types of experiences, including Sri Ramakrishna's own experience, his first major vision of Kali, which was also a great light, right? Overwhelming ocean of light or of consciousness. And then from that, he recognized that this is the same Divine Mother that's worshipped in the temple, that he addresses Ma. Later, he would see the same Divine Mother that he saw in that vision as her in her iconographic form of her rupa, that of, with severed heads and granting boons and holding a sword like this, right? To connecting this universal, or I guess a universal, but this so we can use these terms anarchonic and iconic. Anarchonic is a problem is a form of thinking of God or worshiping God that's not human-like or animal-like, right? An iconic form is, of course, the term icon has technical meaning within art history and things like this. We're using it in a particular religious sense, is a form for the divine, like you'd think of either of a god with being described as looking a certain way, having a certain amount of arms, wearing certain carrying certain things, wearing like this, it's like, so like Kali, Shiva holding a trishul, Kali holding a sword, Durga riding on a lion, Krishna holding a flute with two arms in a certain bent pose, a garland of wildflowers, Vanamala, like this. This is the iconographic conception of the divine. Also in worship, in tangible worship, in physical worship, there's also iconographic and aniconographic methods of puja, or items of puja, or focus of puja. For instance, here in the temple, we have our major iconographic rupa, called the Archana Vigraha, or the Arch Avatar, that of Kali, the Murti of Kali, Madakshineshwari Kali. Very distinctly, she has, can't say human form, because she has the goddess form, where it's still like an iconographic form. But there's also forms like yantras that don't have any correspondence to human-like features or animal-like features, or shivalingams, or shalagram shilas, right? Or trees, or anthills, right? That's one use of the word aniconic. I think there's an article we've assigned in a few times in previous courses by the first chapter, second chapter from Dhyan X book, Darshan, where it describes a little bit about this iconic and aniconic forms of worship. That's for tangible worship, an object to worship, an image to worship. There's not iconographic images and iconographic images, but even conception. Like, how do you think of the absolute? How do you think of God? How do you think of the goddess? How do you think of Brahman, right? You can think of it, you can think of a divine form of a god or goddess or of an avatar that we believe is identical with Brahman, that is Brahman, or is an incarnation of Brahman or an aspect of Brahman, right? We can also think something a little bit more less concrete, right? Like light or consciousness or space or existence or bliss. A term many of us know, Satchitananda, is such a description, right? The description of the divine as existence. These are very abstract concepts, but they're abstract concepts so we can still think about existence, consciousness, joy, bliss, experience, things like this, Satchitananda. And actually in the Devi Gita in general, the Divine Mother presents herself in three, I'm giving a little cheating, jumping ahead of myself, three ways of meditating on the divine, on her. One is as Satchitananda, right? Just on the nature of existence. So very, can't say impersonal, but not highly personalized, not given a name and form, just the idea of consciousness. And so this Param Mahaha, this great light that appears, is like that. It has no form, it has no space, it has no top, middle, or end. These are the last week's verses. It's not in the form of a female, it's not in the form of a male, it's not in the form of combined male or female, right? So it's like nothing we can think about. All these categories, it's beyond all categories, right? So that's one we can think of her, right? And we're encouraged. That's one method of meditation on the Divine Mother as Satchitananda. Another method, which will come maybe in the fifth, I think it's if my memory is correct, it's in the 5th chapter of Devi Bhagavatam. That is a Virat as a universal form. Very similar, almost identical to the description of the universal form in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna reveals his universal form as everything, encompassing everything. That's another. Okay, I think I'm not gonna, I was about to say authorized method of meditation. I'm not the one authorized. This is authorized by the goddess in the Devi Bhagavatam. So it's within the text. Meditating on the Supreme Brahman as Satchitananda, meditating on the Supreme Brahman as the Virat, as the universal manifested universe, right? Very powerful and overwhelming, actually, right? And then the third, which is where we're going to meet today, is to meditate on her personal form, her nama-rupa, her name and her form, to meditate on Bhuvaneshwari as a goddess, right? Right. The last verse we read, or 2 verses ago, was she does not have, this light does not have a male form or a female form or a neuter form or a joint form, right? But now it says, now she definitely, I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself, one verse ahead of myself. She definitely has a female form. So now that universal or impersonal or subtle or the space of consciousness, that great light trying to be described in those previous verses, are now another way of thinking of her. Let's look at the verse. That's probably the best thing to do here. That has come, the verse. Okay, this is the verse from last week, right? Without beginning or end, it had no body, no hands, no other limbs. It did not have a woman's form, na cha strī-rūpeṇābhād-divyaṃ. It did not have na pumma-rupa, did not have a man's form, nor a combined form, right? We spent a lot of time talking about that. That dazzling brilliance blinded the eyes of the gods, O king. When they cut themselves or their vision returned, the gods beheld ... That's where we left off last week, the ... Let's look at the next verse. Let me get my own verses here and caffeinate a little bit. tāvat-tadeva strī-rūpeṇābhād-divyaṃ mano-haram. Tavat means something like truly, or so much so, so great, like that. So it's now something big's about to happen. Tadeva, that only. What did they see? Strī-rūpeṇā appeared having a female form, a woman. Actually, strī-rūpa is not just female as in the general gender. Strī means woman, right? A woman's form, right? Right. And it says, divyaṃ means shining, mano-haram. Mano-haram, he's translated as charming and delightful. I like this definition, it's pretty good. Mano-hara, mano means mind, hara means taking, catching, stealing. When something takes your mind or attracts your mind, steals your mind, mano-hara. It's a very fancy way of saying attractive, bewildering, appealing, captivating, like arresting, like this, right? It's also, mano-hara is one of the epithets for Kamadev, the Hindu version of Cupid, right? And the Hindu version of Cupid is not a little tiny cherub that shoots a little arrow at you and makes you fall in love, right? Cupid is very, very handsome. So much so that anyone, male or female, looking at him, his mind will be stolen. You'll catch your mind. Mano-hara, right? Right. So that's his quality. And of course, his arrow makes anybody you look at or who he directs you to, makes them steal your mind. So it's a beautiful word, right? So that light, now the light appearing now in the form of a woman, charming and delightful. So you see, we had Satchitananda, we'll have soon as that universal light. We had in a few chapters, we'll have the Virat, the universal form. Now we're being presented this form of the goddess. This form of the goddess, that's obviously a goddess, right? That's important. There's a verse here. I'm going to backtrack here to a verse I wanted to read last week. I didn't get to. This is from the introduction, maybe the second page of our textbook, the Mackenzie Brown's introduction, right? But it's good to stop just for a second and go back to literally page 1 of the whole thing, right? To see what we're meditating on, what's being presented in this text, right? The great God, I'll read it, you can see it on the screen. The great goddess is both wholly transcendent and fully immanent. She is that param mahaha, the transcendent being, right? As well as, we'll see, is fully immanent as a Virat, as a universal form that's become everything, right? She's beyond space and time, right? Thus, she has not a male form, then a female form, no middle, no end, no it said no beginning, no end, right? She's not, she's beyond, she is beyond space and time. She is yet embodied within all existent beings, right? She's embodied as all existent beings, as well as in all existent beings. And we'll find verses like this. One of the ways she's embodied, what's the verse say? Without form, as pure infinite consciousness, Chit, in the Satchit Ananda. Yet she dwells each month in the sacred shrine of Kamakya in Assam during her menses. Now, last week we mentioned that we had the Arambachi festival in Assam, an important Shaktipitam where the Divine Mother, as Mother Earth, also this is a place of her yoni, and this the festival for 3 to 5 days, where she menstruates. And it said that the water coming out of the well, that it also turns red. And to get a little bit of cloth dyed red when that is considered very auspicious. At Kalimandi, we have a little bit, a few items from that sacred space, including one piece of cloth that dyed red from this moment of this. But you think about it, she's without form, pure, infinite consciousness. Yet not only does she dwell everything, she dwells very specifically in like in a temple where she menstruates. Right? It's like very grounded. And the reason he pointed out, because the Devi Gita will mention the Kamakya specifically, right? So this is not just, oh, we're bringing all kinds of goddess lore. This is a text that before the Devi Gita, it mentioned the Shakti Pitams, including the importance of Kamakya, and in the Devi Gita itself will mention the importance of certain places such as Kamakya, right? So it's important. She is the universal cosmic energy known as Shakti, right? The power, the inherent, I mean, we talked about Brahman is inherently, truth is inherently dynamic. That dynamism is Shakti, right? And the psychophysical guiding force designated as Kundalini. So this is also a yogic text, right? She's also within the body, not just abstractly or as all name and form or energy. She specifically resides in our body as Kundalini. Towards the end of the Devi Gita, she will make distinctions between different types of worship, Vedic worship and tantric worship. And when she mentions tantric worship, she specifically mentions as part of tantric worship the awakening of her as Kundalini as an important part, right? She resonates with each individual. She is eternal without origin or birth, Adiyanta. Yet she is born in this world in age after age. She takes both as avatars, right? But also just as her manifestations are her birth. She appears as and gives audience to enlighten somebody, to kill a demon, to do something like this. She embodies herself, right? To support those who seek her assistance. That's a beautiful line, right? She embodies herself in age after age to support those who seek her existence. In this story, the gods sought her support. They sought her, did austerity, meditated, did worship to get her response. And so this is her coming out of this formless, shapeless, genderless light and taking a female's form. In a certain sense, that's her embodiment, that's her avatar, right? But it's being more specific, because what are they going to ask for her? You have to be born literally as Parvati. So she'll take even a more, this itself is her birth, but then she'll agree to take birth as Parvati, right, in the body, in the family of the Himalayas, in order to marry Shiva and give birth to Kartikeya, as the story tells, right? Precisely to provide comfort and guidance to her devotees, she presents herself in the Devi Gita to reveal the truths leading both to worldly happiness and to supreme, it said go, I mistyped goals, right? In order to provide, so this is her motherly nature, in order to provide blessings for us, right? Guidance and comfort to those of us who are suffering, gods who are suffering in this story. She presents herself in this text to them, and therefore to us. We also have an ontological problem, may not be Tadakasura taking over, but sometimes I think our problem is way worse than a demon that can be killed by somebody. You know, we have, it's a more profound. She presents to reveal the truth leading to, now this isn't to worldly happiness, as well as the supreme goal. The supreme goal in Sanskrit means param gati, the supreme purushartha, the supreme parama purushartha, the final goal of liberation, like that. But actually there's different final goals, right? Text is pretty broad, you know. Your goal to reveal the one goal could be that to which you reveal spiritual truth and to guide us is worldly happiness, right? She's a mother. She wants us to be happy. Those who want happiness, she'll give happiness. Those who want prosperity will be prosperous, can be prosperous. Those who want protection pray for protection, she'll give protection. Those who want children there's verses like this. Those who want children get children, those who want, you know, because a mother wants her children minimum to be happy and safe and healthy, right? So that's legitimate goal. That's one of the four goals of life, right? The Purushartha, Satya Purushartha, and the supreme goals. And the supreme goals are listed as two. Dwelling in her jeweled island. We hinted a little bit at that, because that's when Vishnu first revealed her nature to the gods. He says she's dwelling now in the jeweled island. Jeweled island is her supreme heaven. As the form of Bhuvaneshwari, her highest heaven is the jeweled island. It says, and it's beautifully described just at the very end, or just prior to the end of the the Devi Bhagavatam, 12th skanda, I believe. So you can, in other words, you can go to heaven with her. This is the equivalent. This is the Shakta version of Vaikuntha was Vishnu, or Goloka was Krishna, or Kailash, the eternal Kailash was Shiva, right? So that's one, and that you have to think that's a goal for some people, maybe for you, maybe for me, right? To be, because we want to live with her, we want to love her, we want to serve her, we want to be with her, right? And or it says mergence into her own perfect being, complete unity, unification with her as her being. And so all these are given in the Devi Bhagavad, in the Devi Gita. She presents herself out of love in the Devi Gita, in these beautiful verses, in the verse we're about to read, where she appears, right? Why? To reveal spiritual teachings. What are the purposes of spiritual teachings? For there are various goals of her devotees' longing, both happiness in this world, right? And even the supreme goals, the two goals, not stacking one above the other, to live eternally with her, loving and serving her in the highest heaven of her, in her realm, right? Or perfect unification, a very more Vedantic way of understanding, perfect unification with her essential being. What a beautiful, this is just one paragraph, but I think recently I read it again, just kind of preparing for one of our discussions, and it's like it jumped out, how beautiful, just in a few 4 or 5 sentences it captures. So being that this is the focus, let's see what she's going to do again. Let's see what the verse says again. That light, so what's the purpose? That light appearing now in the form of a woman, charming and delightful. Says, let's see here. Tāvat-tadeva mano-haram, atīva, ramaṇīyāṅgīṃ, kumārīṃ, nava-yauvanām. Atīva means exceedingly, right? Ramaṇīyāṅgīṃ means, again, charming, delightful, right? These are her nature. See, there's many forms of gods and goddesses and many forms of Supreme Devi. Not all of them are usually described as charming and delightful. You have Chinnamasta and Bhairavi and Kali, and a lot of her Dhyan Mantras are not described as charming and delightful. They're described as angry, as horrible, as frightening, as destroying, as like this, right? So this is not this form. Bhuvaneshwari is extremely beautiful manifestation, right? Right. Ramaṇīyāṅgīṃ, Angīṃ means limbs. So it says she was exceedingly beautiful of limb, means her body is very beautiful, very attractive. Remember the previous line, it says mano-haram, so beautiful, it captures the mind, it delights the mind, right? Right. And then it says kumārīṃ. So he translated as maiden. And then nava-yauvanām means, it's a correct translation, a freshness of youth, a budding youth, blooming youth, right? A blooming youth, right? Let's look at this. So we discussed in the last weeks the difference are one way of understanding her as supreme light, now as this form, as Nirgun Brahman and Sagun Brahman. That's one thing. So that's okay. We have now Sagun Brahman. Sagun Brahman means Brahman means two things. It means Brahman with qualities. What are those qualities? Usually those qualities are name and form, Namarupa. So Brahman as this world is Sagun, right? And Brahman as the personal deity is Sagun. Now it becomes a personal god or personal goddess, right? Because here it says, it didn't have a female form or a man's form or a joint form, but now it's very distinctly has a female form, right? A woman's form, right? And actually it says strī-rūpeṇābhād. Strī-rūpeṇā means with the form of a woman. So it's two, well, it means two things, or two, same thing said different ways, slightly different feeling. With the form of a woman. So that's we understood that supreme light, right, now has a form of a woman, right, of a goddess, right? It also could be through the form of a woman. So now we see that supreme light we can't comprehend. There's no form, there's no shape, it's beyond categories, right? But now it's presenting a category that we can think about. Now so this is in process theology. We've talked a little bit about process theology, a particular school, important school that's very exhilarating, I think. A lot of possibilities. There's some people who are writing. Jeffrey Long, Dr. Jeffrey Long is somebody who's written a lot on Sri Ramakrishna's perspective and the Whiteheadian process theory and process theology. But anyways, they have this nice term that really strikes me, because 98% of process theologians, right, are in the Christian tradition, often the Methodist tradition, right? And so they have a view that, they look to God through Jesus. That's such an interesting thing to say, right? And therefore they would hold, while being very strict Christians and accepting Christian literature at face value, but because of this intellectual perspective of the process theological perspective, they'd hold that other people may see God, look to God through a different form, right? So it's very interesting that presents a lot of possibilities for a type of religious pluralism, maybe not dissimilar to an aspect of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on religious pluralism. We look to the absolute through a manifestation or a revelation, right? Or so the question is it the absolute revealing itself, or are we projecting onto the absolute a name and form, right? This text says, obviously, she's revealing herself from the absolute. She reveals a form. They can't see, they're blinded by the light. They have no understanding. They close their eyes and lose their stability, right? When they catch themselves, they again look at her, and now she appears. The point is they're still looking at the light. They're still looking at, and what that light represents, the fourth state of Turiya, we talked about from the very first lecture, right, of this course. That light is the supreme, right? It's the light of awareness, right? It's also never a subject. It's never an object, it's always a subject. Yet they now see the subject, or they now see as an object, or they now see the infinite light, right, through a form, right? So it's through a form, through a female's form, right? In the Kula Nava Tantra, lay Tantra, there's a line that's quoted sometimes, and it's a useful line, and it's a controversial line. I have to think a little bit about it. It came in my mind. I was trying to remember it last week, and I went like a different direction in our discussion, but now is the perfect time. Sadhakanam hitartya brahmano rupa kalpanaha. That means on Brahman, a spiritual aspirant, the sadhaka, right? Hopefully that's who we are, right? A sadhaka, in order to contemplate Brahman, right, imagines a form. So this is both very interesting and also potentially a little disturbing, this line, right? Another way to say the same thing is that, I'm saying something different. Another way that the verse has been translated and to be understood is, for the sake of a sadhaka, for the sake of a spiritual aspirant's meditation, right, the Brahman takes a form, right? So you can see, are we assigning a form are we imagining a form in order to think of Brahman, which is by definition, at least maybe by definition, beyond form, or beyond thought, beyond a thought. How can we think about something beyond thought, right? Right. Are we imagining a form and therefore attributing a form that's not there? But so that's one thing. Or let's assume even that's true, right? Is that a bad thing? right? There's certain schools of thought that believe this is true, right? That all this, I've had one yogi I met. I have to admit I didn't like. I won't mention his name, right? Because he went against my trend of thought. And he mentioned something like, oh yes, Ramaṇīyāṅgīṃ, Mahabharata, fictitious story is not true. Just completely dismissed them as just imaginative stories, right? And of course, I'm at that time, especially, I mean, still now, even more, hopefully now, we're devoted to Lord Ram and Lord Krishna, and don't consider the stories fictional. But I'm not attached to them being historic in the sense of, like, a biography about Napoleon or something, or something like this, or a musician that's famous or that died or something. It's deeper truth, right? But some would view as like, oh no, Brahman is by its definition beyond name and form and without name and form, nirgun, nirupa, right? By definition, it's beyond definition even, that can be said, right? And therefore, everybody who's imagining different forms and names for the absolute, they're doing just that. They're imagining it, right? They're making it up, right? So some would hold that that's a useless exercise, right? To imagine something that's almost opposite of what the truth is, right? Something that's not true. Imaginary, one of the ways we can think of imaginary is not true, right? Right. But that, or does, I mean, there's like 5 or 6 categories in this line, in this verse, right? Let me get out of here so I can think about the verse a little bit. Or another thing is, even if we're imagining it, is that a bad thing? It allows us to think of that which is beyond thought. That means that's a great merit. That's Swami Vivekananda's definition of the ishta. The ishta is making of an object of the subject, right? It's like, and therefore allows us to think about something, to think of the thinker, or to think of the absolute, right? And maybe and so that when people think this way, they often think, oh, this is a stage, right? Until we go beyond, and then maybe there's a stage beyond nama-rupa, beyond thought, beyond name and form, and we use the imagined name and form in order to think of Brahman, right? And contemplate Brahman and worship Brahman for the sake of the sadhak. And maybe we'll go beyond that. That's one possible view, right? But this kalpana, imagining the verses that are around the original verse in the Tantra are a little bit hazy in their meaning, I think. But one way that this verse is taken, and I know some disciples of Sri Ramakrishna have commented on this verse in this way, is that the absolute Brahman reveals certain forms, right? For the sake, so that we can think of it, or her, or them, or him, right? It reveals, and so that fits the storyline, right? There's an infinite light, and then from that, a form takes place, right? And it's not any form. It's the term kalpana, rupa kalpana. It takes on a form is imagined. A kalpana we can actually use, maybe a form is contemplated or meditated upon, visualized maybe. And so that makes more sense in the tantric tradition, where a divine form is visualized, and that's one of the distinctive features of Tantra. Maybe, I mean, it's very hard to make a statement that that there is a distinctive feature, but it's not a universal. It's a characteristic of a lot of tantric practice. Is that, and we've talked about that also, is that it's that a deity, we visualize deities, right? That to either visual, and one of the ways we visualize is by reciting and meditating on a Dhyan Mantra. Every deity has a verse or verses that describe the form. We've talked about that. So Kali has a Dhyan Mantra, has many Dhyan Mantra describe. We meditate, it says like, we meditate upon her, who was long flowing hair, with 4 arms, holding a sword and a severed head, granting boons and blessings with the poses of her other 2 arms. She had 3 eyes, a 3rd eye resembling the newly risen sun. She is naked. She is facing south. She's standing on top of the heart of Lord Shiva in a cremation ground. Her auspicious shouts spread through the 4 directions. These are descriptions That's a Dhyan Mantra. And we use those, and so and we believe that these Dhyan Mantras are revealed in the scriptures and they're not made up. Somebody must have written them down, right? And maybe somebody has sat down, I'm going to create a form to be meditated upon. I'll describe the goddess, and in the future people will meditate on it. Could just been that type of mental exercise, a conscious mental exercise. The view is really that sages saw the deities and then wrote down what they saw. This is the popular view, right? And therefore, the description is going to be given the next 10 verses, probably. I don't know exactly, but about 10 verses, describing Ma Bhuvaneshwari's revelation, her rupa, right? You can see, oh, they saw that, and then they're going to turn around to tell people, people ask, how do we meditate upon her? We heard you can meditate upon her as Satchidananda and as the Virat, the universal, but how do we meditate upon her form? Well, I'll tell you what we saw. She has 4 arms, right? She has a female form. She has a freshness of youth. And she's wearing certain types of jewelry. She has armlets and bells, and she chews betel nut. And we'll get to those verses beautifully described, So that description is a Dhyan Mantra. In our textbook, there is these verses at the end of the commentary. There's some a few in the footnotes or the end notes of the section. There's he gives some from the Sharada Tilaka Tantra and from the Devi Upanishad. He gives a couple Dhyan Mantras of Bhuvaneshwari. So you can hear that from this revelation, you could generate such a Dhyan Mantra. The Dhyan Mantra is describing in a mantric form, so visualization, contemplation, what they're experiencing. So in a certain sense, this revelation is a Dhyan Mantra, even though it's not exactly in that form, right? But these are the details. When you want to meditate upon the Devi as Bhuvaneshwari, you can meditate on this form, right? As described here. So if a form is imagined or attributed or revealed by Brahman or for Brahman for the sake of the sadhak's contemplation, right? So what is it that we're meditating upon? What is it that when we're thinking of the Divine Mother and this form of the Divine Mother, of any god or goddess, who is it that we're imagining on what or attributing or that's revealing? Brahman, right? So we have to remember that the purpose, the larger interpretation, the larger point of that verse is that the divine forms, even if imagined, right, or revealed, or maybe not the final stage, the purpose, the object is meditation on Brahman, on the absolute, right? And therefore, the iconography itself, the language of iconography, let's rephrase that. Iconography has a language. There is a syntax and language, right, that will mean different things about Brahman, right? So, like for instance, if this is just a simple example, like she'll have this. She'll have 3 eyes. She'll be next a few verses next week probably. We'll get to the verse where it's describing and have 3 eyes. So what does that say? So the goddess had 3 eyes, and we can interpret, give all kinds of meaning for that. But if it's about Brahman, maybe it means past, that it's maybe in the previous verse it said she has no past or present, no future. She's no beginning, no end. Maybe 3 eyes is without limit or all knowing, right? Past, present, and future, right? Maybe having multiple arms, it means all powerful, multiple, more than, maybe certain weapons or certain items she holds are aspects of that for us, aspects of Brahman, aspects of the absolute. So that's important to remember as we go through the different things that are being revealed. What's being revealed? The absolute, right? A way for us to meditate. Let's go back to the verse here. I'm getting myself going away from my original here. Okay. Strī-rūpeṇābhād-divyaṃ mano-haram. So this aspect of the absolute as Bhuvaneshwari is very, very beautiful, right? And that's her name hasn't been mentioned as Bhuvaneshwari yet. We'll get to that. But Bhuvaneshwari, one of the major definitions, she's the ruler of the world. She's the queen of the world, right? There's a term, Tribhuvana, means the three worlds. So Bhuvaneshwari is a ruler of the three worlds, right? Tribhuvana, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, the earth, the heavens, like this, the sky, the atmosphere, and the heavens, right? She is a ruler of the world, right? And an aspect of her as ruler of the world is it's going to be heavily, all the symbols that she's going to be wearing, the things, how she's going to be dressed, what she's going to be doing, how she's appearing, is to empathize in iconographic language a term called Aishwarya. Aishwarya means glory, it means wealth, it means power and influence, right? So this is she as so Bhuvaneshwari could be described as the queen of the world, the queen mother, right? And so with a queen, even if we have, we don't, at least not in our country, we don't have a queen mother anymore. We got rid of our queen mother, separated from her a long time ago, like the kings and queens of the old world, right? But in Britain, they have a mother. She's the queen. They have the queen, but also it's a maternal figure, but still a little separate. She's still a ruler, a separated ruler, right? And so some of the qualities are going to be those qualities of a queen, a controller, right? A monarch, right? To use earthly government ideas, right? But she's also showing certain things that are very maternal, right? Not exactly like Virgin Mary maternal, not quite like that, but we'll see. So she's this term kumārīṃ. Oh, that's an important term. The kumārīṃ means here translated as a maiden. Kumari or Kumari, right? Kumari is, it means virgin. Kumari means a little girl, right? A little girl. Kumari means a pre-pubescent girl, somebody before puberty, right? Right. So there's a process during Navaratri. Right now we're in another Navaratri. I forgot to mention we're in the Gupta Navaratri, Varahi Navaratri. Today is the first day of one of the more esoteric 9-night worships, not so publicly done. If you want to follow, do special prayers from tonight for the next 9 days. But part of the process of Navaratri Puja is Kumari Puja, where we worship little girls. There, Kumari means pre-pubescent girls, right? And we worship little girls. We go and we dress them and give them money and clothes. And there's a process called the Kumari Puja as one of the many rupas, forms the Divine Mother appears and is worshipped in, right? So that's another meaning. Kumari also means an unmarried girl, right? Kumari also means just a young woman is also Kumari, unmarried young woman. And you see an unmarried young woman in traditional culture, we would think that's also another way of saying a virgin, right? Unmarried young woman is not just a husband, no longer, not just children, not started that aspect of life. So which one of this is Bhuvaneshwari? So freshness of youth, and in the next verse it'll describe very attractive features, right? So the aim here is that she's a very young woman, right? And a goddess that Bhuvaneshwari is linked to is Sodashi, Sundari, Tripura Sundari, Sodashi, which means a girl at age 16, right? And so that is a girl in the tradition, not yet married, right? But of meritable age, right? At the nava-yauvanām, at the freshness of youth, right? At the height of her youth, right? And most desire. And please forgive, these are very culturally. These are, some things are universal, it can be found in many cultures, right? But it's going to be playing. These verses are going to be playing on extremely playing on classical Indian Hindu aesthetics, right? So this is a woman at her most attractive is a 16-year-old woman, 16-year-old girl, right? Of course, different people find different things attractive and for different reasons, but why is that? Because she's at her what is it? She's at her most fertile. Maybe not exactly, maybe these are not, I'm not expert at these things, I don't know if that's true, but that's the idea, that she's most fertile, right? But there's another thing, so you have so she's an unmarried woman. Another way of saying she has no husband. And in Indian traditional, it means she's a virgin. So she's a goddess that's a mother and a virgin, right? So that's a strange thing to have, right? You have a virgin mother. Of course, we have this in Christianity, in Catholic and Orthodox Christianity, they focus a lot on the Virgin Mother, right? Of course, all Christians, not gonna say most Christians believe that Mary is both virginal and a mother, as a miraculous, as a sign of a miracle, right? But there's something when you see the idea of a virgin goddess and especially a virgin mother. What does that mean? That means she is the source of everything in that sense of mother, right? And she does not need a man to do this, right? That's that she does not need a male consort or counterpart, and she is not the consort or counterpart of a male, right? Yet she is a controller and she is the mother. She is the one who gives birth with no husband, right? I mean, she's self-complete. So this is a major shocked up perspective, right? This is and we've talked about the Devi Gita, Devi Bhagavatam is one of the classic Sanskritic texts that elevates the theology of the Devi, right? Shakta theology, right? Here real quick. So I think these verses, detail is very important. She's very beautiful. She's at the height of youth, or the freshness of youth, right? The most desirable, the most the symbol of. Remember, she is showing us aspects of the supreme absolute truth, right? We see Brahman through the imagined or the revealed form, right? So what is this form saying? It's saying things about Brahman. That means the supreme absolute truth is intrinsically dynamic. That's Shaktism. We talked about that, right? And it's intrinsically feminine. This is another big statement, right? And it's radically feminine, right? It does not need a male counterpart. In the Bhuvaneshwari Rupa, she does take a male not mentioned in our text immediately, right? But Bhuvaneshwari, she does, in order to play, right? She does take on a consort. She creates a consort out of herself. She herself splits into, she splits into another form, male and female, Bhuvaneshwara and Bhuvaneshi. Bhuvaneshwara means the Lord of the world, and Bhuvaneshi, the mother or the goddess of the world, right? And because obviously she wants to play and create in a different way, right? But Shiva, Bhuvanesha, is born from her. It comes out of her. And then she sits on his lap. This is not in our immediate text, right? But just giving background or foreground, right? She sits on his lap, right? And in her jeweled island, in her heaven world, right? Right. And but it's interesting, because of her touch, Shiva becomes Bhuvaneshwara. Shiva becomes Lord of the world only because he touches Devi, right? And then even that scene, there's a scene, because we're dealing with iconography and deep symbolism, iconography, and veiled symbolism and iconography. Often in Hindu gods and goddesses, Parvati or Lakshmi will sit on the lap of Shiva or Vishnu. So here in Bhuvaneshwari, she sits on the lap of Bhuvanesha, Shiva, right? Later, not in this text, right? Right. And that means, you can see, that's subservient, right? But it's not really subservient, right? Actually, it's like he becomes, in this sense, in the story for Bhuvaneshwari, right? He becomes a throne, right? His pedestal, her pedestal. That means she is enthroned on Shiva. We have this image more dramatically and more erotically in tantric imagery was Kali standing on Shiva or sitting on Shiva in union, right? And Bhuvaneshwari will also have descriptions of her sitting just like Lita Tripura on Shiva, on the pedestal of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and Isha, right? So this idea that even her as the wife or as the counterpart, as consort with Shiva, she's still supreme. He has a position because of her touch, and she's the one enthroned, right? So all these things are going to come. So there's a term we haven't talked too much about. I think we may have mentioned it a little bit in our Hindu goddess class. We have theology, right? The term theology, we all know. There's, you know, our school subtitle is what are the applied theological studies at Mandir, right? Or a school of applied theology, something like this, right? And theology is talk or thought about God, right? Theos, right? But a goddess is thea, right? Theology is the study of God, and theology, it's a weird thing to pronounce, my tongue doesn't do it, I'm not accustomed to it, is the study and discussion about the goddess, right? So this text is describing she is, if she has a form in this text, she has a female form, right? And all the descriptions are emphasizing her both supreme nature as the substratum and source and progenitor and mother of everything, and her complete, so that as her feminine nature as mother, her complete independence and rulership, Aishwarya, as goddess, as God, a goddess, Ishwara, Ishwari, right? Ishwari specifically, right? Right. This is very important. So it's a radical. There's texts that are much more radical. There is the Bhagavata Purana, which is even we've talked about that, even more feminized or feminist or shocked, even giving even more absolute status, that a further development of the Shakti theology has been developing here. But already this is a study of a revelation of not just the divine, but of the goddess, the feminine divine. That's not just an aspect of Brahman, but is identical with Brahman, and that maybe even could be say that Brahman is one of her aspects, right? She's a supreme goddess, and even Brahman is one of her aspects. That's can be defended, and as we go through the verses, when she really starts speaking about Jnana Yoga and the like, and Vedanta and the like, she will make this argument, and we'll see how she herself makes this argument. Okay, see, I thought I was going to do 5 verses today because we're just talking general iconography. Didn't work out that way. Another point, I had something we were during our evening tea. We were talking Swami Bhajanananda about the theology and theology idea, right? And I realized that this is her revelation to whom in the story? What's being revealed? The supreme goddess that is identical to Brahman, right? The one that's absolute and without form and beyond form, as well as having a form. Which form? A female form when she has form, right? Who is she revealing herself to? Right? To the gods, right? Who are the gods? There's and Vishnu is not mentioned anymore, but it says in the original text, Vishnu is also there. Vishnu went to do tapasya. He learned along with the gods. But we have Indra, we have Himalaya, we have Varuna, we have very important Vedic gods, right? Shiva is not here. He's doing tapasya, right? But he'll take part in it too. So she's revealing herself as the supreme absolute truth to the gods, all of which, especially in the Vedic tradition and in popular Hinduism most of the time, right, are worshipped as the supreme absolute truth, right, by various sects, right? Each one of the gods who's having this vision is believed by many people and has verses and texts in the Vedas themselves describing them as absolute, right? So that's a big move, just as a Shakti theology movement, right? That she's revealing that she's the supreme truth, not them, right? And we mentioned that this is also a sectarian text, right? A Shakti sectarian text. And I think we mentioned this last week also. Her revelation as an infinite cluster of light that then takes the form of a goddess. That's happened before. We mentioned last week that this is from the Upanishad. There's similar verses in the Upanishads of a yaksha, light taking the form of a yaksha, and to humble Indra and a few different gods like this, right? In the Devi Bhagavatam, in the 12th skanda Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, right, the same story is told, but this time the yaksha reveals herself as the goddess, right? So those stories are seen as the humbling of the gods. So this happened a lot in sectarian texts, where the gods of somebody else's tradition have to learn that they're not supreme and the god of the text is supreme. You have Indra being humiliated by Krishna, right? Or Brahma being humiliated by Krishna when he steals the cows, like to show that, or Krishna dancing on the heads of the Nagas, showing the Nagas are not supreme. You know, so you could see this type of thing. This is a move of so many texts, right? So here, this is also an important part of the Devi Bhagavatam, right? That the gods themselves are learning, and therefore the worshippers of those gods, that their gods aren't supreme, right? That the really supreme God is the goddess, right? So that's also a move. So this is also part of that theology rather than theology. There's a revelation of the goddess, right? A strong goddess text, right? So I think actually I was Swami Bhajanananda and myself worked on 2 more verses describing more her beautiful forms. Go back to the verse where we are here. But I think it's out of not overdoing it every night and going way over. We'll probably stop with this verse. The light appeared now in the form of a woman, charming and delightful. She was exceedingly beautiful in limb, a maiden in the freshness of youth. Yeah, so we won't, I really want to, because I've got all ready to do the next verse, but we won't. So we'll end there for our official comments. Jai Sri Guru Maharaji ki jai, Jai Mahamai ki jai, Swami Maharaji ki jai, Jai Ma Dakshineshri Bhavatarani Dakshinikada ki jai, Jai Bhuvaneshwari Devi ki jai, Jai Ma. So we ended early, so any discussions or comments or questions from what we've talked about so far, or what we've talked thus far, not just so far for tonight's talk, but how it all fits together. Any comments?
I think Guruji, earlier Premdara ji was asking, we were talking about how Ma reveals herself. And he asked in the comments, or does she reveal herself as a devotee feels her?
Yeah, so we would say that, and Sri Ramakrishna would say that the form you love is the form that appears, the form that's real, right? Right. And Krishna says that in the Gita, that whatever way people approach me, I respond in that way. Right. And of course, they're approaching the goddess, right? They're doing her. It's not like they're going to be shocked when they're praying to God and the goddess shows up in the story. Remember, they're doing the Amba Yajna, the Devi Yajna. They're chanting her names, her hymns, Nyasav, her mantras, her Bij mantra, the Maya Bija, like this, right? So they're worshiping the goddess. So this makes sense that the goddess is the one who appeared, right? So that's we're talking more broader points, right? But I think that's the way we generally look, is that and even that idea of the kalpana, the rupa kalpana, that the form that we think about is also the form that the divine takes, right? And that's a beautiful, I mean, if it's true, we believe this is our orientation. This is our kind of grounded view of kind of the foundational principle of our understanding of religious pluralism in a certain sense, is that the one truth responds. It's the one truth being called. If it's the one truth being called, the one truth, of course, different truths can be called, but if it's the one truth being called, right, it's out of sincerity, it's that responds, and that responds in the way that we call, right? I think that's true. But it could also be true. There's also stories, and I think interesting. I recently read maybe a paper or an article. It may have been a paper, right? Analyzing. It was recent, but my brain is not sharp enough in my old age to you remember recent things anymore. But it was analyzing like what makes like the Hindu convert, right? Like what brought us. I'm not going to investigate too much into your personal life, right? And sometimes it's having an experience that's totally different that you were looking for, right? You're praying a certain way to God in a certain way, right? And somebody else shows up, or a different form shows up, or different, you realize, or you experience, or you encounter something different than you expected. So much so that they may cause a crisis or revolution in your own consciousness, and maybe a rejection of a previous view, or a re-challenging, or at least a rethinking, or a broadening. Sometimes I think the ideal form, right, where you put the two together, is that then therefore we broaden our understanding. Because if we're thinking, the way I look at it, if we're like, for instance, if we're thinking of Jesus and Kali shows up, right, you can say, oh, Jesus isn't real, Kali's real, because she's the one that showed up, right? That's one thing you can do, and reject Jesus, right? Right. Or I know people that maybe something different. They're praying to Jesus and Kali shows up and they realize Jesus is bigger than I thought, right? One of her forms is Kali, right? Or the reality that's behind the one we're looking through, that I was looking through Jesus, has come to me in a different form to look through, to use this in the form of a woman, the form of a goddess. So something like that. They could also be, a lot of people experience a realization that doesn't match what they were expecting. So it's not just that however we approach responds. Sometimes it's a fact, maybe it's the fact that we approach that God responds. It's not just that the way we approach, God will respond in that way. Although that's a famous line in the Gita, right? It could be the fact that we're approaching that God has to respond. If we're sincere and we approach, God, the mother or the divine reality will respond. But because the divine reality is infinitely greater than us, she will respond in the way she sees fit. And also sometimes if we touch divine reality, which by definition can't be thought, it's going to challenge our thinking, right? So I think minimally that, right? If we have some idea in our mind and we get a little touch, a little feel, a little fragrance of that divine reality, it can't possibly just confirm what we thought, right? Because if my spiritual experience has just confirmed what I thought, that almost goes against the definition of a spiritual experience, right? It's just something that I don't know, that I'd be deeply disappointed if that was the case, right? And I think that should be a sign. We should be worried that if our spiritual experiences and religious understanding just conforms exactly to what we think or what we've been told, right? She will always be more than that. That's the thing. The divine will always be more.
It's interesting, Guruji. I've been thinking about in the 11th chapter of the Gita, when Krishna reveals his cosmic form. And first Arjuna, and it's described so dramatically in that kind of virat, incomprehensible form. And first Arjuna, he apologizes because he realizes that, he apologizes, oh, I'm so sorry, I called you friend so casually. When he realizes the two-armed human form was that, whatever he's looking at now, so he's apologizing. And then at the end of all of that, he says, please, I can't take this. Please show me your four-armed form. Implying as Vishnu. But it's very interesting how, and Krishna, will change according to that. And then, but also that idea that this form of Virat, that cosmic form, the idea that Krishna says, and just remember that it's very few can see this. And it's not by charity, it's not by austerity, it's not by study of the scriptures that this form can be seen the way you have seen it. It implies a rare.
Yes. But he sees that form and then can't handle it, right? But now when he takes his four-arm form and then two-arm form again, right? Then he's like, Paramam Pavitram, you are supremely pure, you are the infinite, you are time. Like now he looks at the old form that he knows and that he has relationship with, but it's been stretched, by the experience, right? That's an important thing, right? It's not just, oh, go, thank God that's gone. Now I can get back to the reality of Krishna being my friend and charioteer, right? You know, but also shows of course, in that story, there's so much rasa in the Bhagavad Gita story, right? That the absolute supreme being, who is a universal form of life and birth and death and all gods and death, I mean, the whole thing, right? Right. Also is Arjuna's friend, right? And that's how Arjuna gets in. That's that's his connection, right? And we're told we should develop of course, not just, we're told in the devotional tradition to develop a relationship, or to discover our relationship, that of mother and child, that of child to mother, mother to child, child to mother, between friends, of servant and master, of lover. There's so many relationships that can be there, right? Of course, nothing's absolute. I mean, everything's absolute, but nothing is, I mean, by itself. There's always, we mature and realize more things about our relationship with the divine, right? But they were worshiping her as mother in the story, back to our text, right? And she appeared as mother, right? So that's an important part also, right? But when they first saw her, they got completely overwhelmed, right? They knew who they were praying to, right? It describes manasa antaryagnya. They were meditating on her forms, right? And visualizing the pujas within their own mind and heart. Very advanced tantric practice, you would say, right? But still, when she appeared, it became totally overwhelmed. She showed that she is the supreme goddess, Bhuvaneshwari, whom they're praying to, but she's also Brahman. She has form, and she's also beyond form, right? She has, she has a female form, but also not a female form, right? So there's a lot that the experience is going to challenge their understanding for sure, right? And even at the end of this, they get so overwhelmed. End of the description of the vision, the next 10 verses or so, they're going to be so overwhelmed, they're not going to know what to say. They're going to be lost. They don't have, we won't have the language. But what got them there? They got them there is meditating on verses and names and forms and rituals. So when they get overwhelmed, what do? They go back to names, prayers, verses, and rituals, right? Because we have a language that both allows us to think of God and also is about the God that we can't think about. We have a language for this. So to me, that's, and those verses, they're mostly taken from some verses in the Chandi and from the Devi Upanishad. Spectacular. I love these verses. Anyways, I'm very excited to get to these verses the next couple of weeks. So
the cauliflowers is mentioning that it's reminded of like Ramakrishna touching Vivekananda and transforming his ideas.
Yeah.
And literally his vision also that.
Yeah. Interesting that, you maybe know there's a story where Sri Ramakrishna transferred by touch Shakti to Narendra, who became Vivekananda, right? And he had a lot of experience, and he felt a certain power in him, and he was still immature, the young Vivekananda, right? And it's an interesting little moment. It's just it reminded me. Maybe you don't know that there's another one of Thakur's disciples named Kali, right? Who became Swami Bhajanananda, right? A very important disciple. Sri Ramakrishna came to the West many years. I think 17, 18 years in the West, long time. Brilliant person. But so when they're experimenting, he says, I feel Thakur with some energy in me. When I will try something, brother. I shall meditate. And then when I'm in a state of meditation, touch me, see if you feel anything, right? They're experimenting with things that they didn't understand, right? And so he had this, he went into meditation. When he saw him meditate, Bhajanananda touched his knee, and he felt a shock going to his body too. And then later, Sri Ramakrishna said, you've done a grave mistake, right? He says that what I gave you did do a major change into Vivekananda's mind, into an Advaitic understanding, certain power, certain self-confidence, a divine ego also to do this work, right? And preach a certain way. right? And but say Bhajanananda had a different personality and a different spiritual path. But he says that when he touched Swami Vivekananda's knee, that some Vivekananda's energy went into him, right? Which is different. So he says now you've changed his spiritual focus. He says, anyways, let it be. That's God's will. It will be what it is. He'll make good use of it, right? But he's so sometimes, it's like he had a cherished path he was on, right? And the touch with something overwhelming could change your samskars. Of course, if we have a divine experience, we want our samskars to be changed, right? But interesting that in that Sri Ramakrishna touching Swamiji, and in Swami touching or Bhajanananda touching Swamiji, sometimes the change may not be desirable. It could be in a different direction. Interesting. And because you mentioned it, I thought that of the power, the divine power, overwhelming and changing your samskars. And of course, we're counting on that. We want divine experience in order to overwhelm and change our samskars. But yes, under the right hands. See, Bhuvaneshwari, she is a ever-loving supreme goddess. She's using her power. She knows exactly what she's doing in the story. So I don't know what I'm doing is my problem. Damn, good. Very good point. Anything else? Om. We are very Om Kali. Nobody else? This is your chance. We have a program note. Bring that up. Is that next week we'll have a meeting. The week after that, I think, is that Guru Purnima Swamiji. We were talking about it. 2 weeks from now is Guru Purnima, and so we won't have class. We'll have doing practices and rituals and things like that, which as per our tradition. And then I think in a couple of weeks after that, there's Amavasya. It's also on a Wednesday. And although we don't have anything planned, we have Arati in the evening, but I have a feeling as most of the Amavasya are going, we become it's an exhausting day and no chance to prepare. So and very often all the preparation for the talks go on up to when we turn the camera on. So we won't have a chance on. So I think, so next week we'll have a meeting. Guru Purnima we won't. Week after that we'll have a meeting, and then Amavasya we won't. And after that, I think, unless we want to take a break or something like that, there's nothing else coming, no holiday or important function happening on a Wednesday. So we'll continue probably those at normal dates. I'll post them on the change of dates or the restriction of the dates on the Google page also. Om. All right, thank you, dear ones. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay cool. Pray to Ma. And so I said Navaratri is going on, a very good time for sadhana. And this is not a public Amavasya. Public Navaratri is called Gupta Navaratri. It's a hidden, secret Navaratri. So just your own sadhana, a little extra japa or extra reading, something like this can be done. And it's especially dedicated to goddess Varahi, right? Who is a tantric goddess. And she is one of the generals of the Devi's army, right? So she's a very protective deity. So very important, Varahi Devi. So it's also known as Varahi Amavasya. Varahi Navaratri. So happy Varahi Navaratri. Jai Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Ma. Om. Jai Ma, Ashley, Jai Ma, Krishna Chaitra, Alex, Premdara, Giriji. Jai Ma. Hari Om Tat Sat. Om. Jai Ma. Good night, Premdara.
Good night, dear Guruji. Jai Ma.